Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Brett and I have another reading from the book The Secret Terrace by Bill Hughes, and this chapter is chapter 5 entitled The Sinking of the Titanic. And if you would like, you can download this book and read it for yourself. The link will be provided in the description box. And I would like to say a word of thanks and support to Jard Glisman of Belgium and his show, The Hour of the Truth, also his YouTube channel, Joggler66, and Tom Fress of Inquisition Update. And the three of us recently did a show, actually it wasn't really recent, a couple months ago, and I have been unable to provide that, and I have not been able to upload that from my YouTube download helper for whatever reason. It doesn't really matter. I'll hook up with Yarg and get it from him, but I really should be making my own video, which I'm totally capable of doing. But anyway, I just wanted to quick mention a word about that before I set you off and listening to my recording. So thanks, and I hope you enjoy. Bye-bye. I just want to say hello for a second here. I know it's been a long time since I've been doing any readings on this book. I really don't have an excuse. Just been, trying to get over this winter season here in the Northland, Minnesota, where I live, and finally warming up a little bit here. And I had done the reading of this chapter twice already, and just decided that I needed to re-record it. And hopefully today it'll go better than the last two times. So here we go. The Sinking of the Titanic. When we think of events that have transpired in history over the last 100 to 200 years, there are certain events that stand out as ones of great horror, great surprise, and great sadness. Of the many that come to mind, the most devastating have been the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York City and the sinking of the Titanic. The greatest tragedies in the last 200 years can be traced to the Jesuits. We will now show that the Jesuits planned and carried out the sinking of the Titanic, and we'll show you why they did it. Since the early 1830s, America did not have a central bank. The Jesuits desperately wanted another central bank in America so that they would have a bottomless reservoir from which to draw money for their many wars and other hideous schemes around the world. In 1910, seven men met on Jekyll Island just off the coast of Georgia to establish a central bank, which they called the Federal Reserve Bank. These men were Nelson Aldrich and Frank Vanderlip, both representing the Rockefeller financial empire. Henry Davidson, Charles Norton, and Benjamin Strong representing J.P. Morgan, and Paul Warburg representing the Rothschild banking dynasty of Europe. We have already seen that the Rothschilds were the banking agents for the papacy's Jesuits, holding the, quote, key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church, unquote. Quote, the Morgans were friendly competitors with the Rothschilds and became socially close to them. Morgan's London-based firm was saved from financial ruin in 1857 by the Bank of England, over which the Rothschilds held great influence. Thereafter, Morgan appears to have served as a Rothschild financial agent and went to great length to appear totally American. His Rockefeller's entry into the field was not welcomed by Morgan, and they became fierce competitors. Eventually, they decided to minimize their competition by entering into joint ventures. In the end, they worked together to create a system. In the end, they worked together to create a national banking cartel called the Federal Reserve System. G. Edward Griffin, the creature from Jekyll Island. Unquote, of course. These three financial families, the Rothschilds, the Morgans and Rockefellers, all do the bidding of the Jesuit order because of the Jesuit infiltration in their organizations. They do whatever is necessary to destroy constitutional liberty in America and to bring the Pope to the world domination. As we look back over the 20th century, we see how successful the Jesuits have been. They have continued to squander the wealth of America and continually attack its great Constitution and civil liberties. Daily, the power of the Pope in Vatican City increases. One day, they will achieve total power again. The building of the Titanic began in 1909 at a shipyard in Belfast, the capital of Northern Ireland. Belfast was a Protestant haven and was hated by the Jesuits. World War I began just a few years later. The Titanic was one of a fleet of ships owned by the White Star Line, an international shipping company. Quote, banking was not the only business in which Morgan had a strong financial interest, using his control over the nation's railroads as financial leverage when he created an international shipping trust which included Germany's two largest lines plus one of the two in England, the White Star Lines, unquote. There were a number of very rich and powerful men who made it abundantly clear that they were not in favor of the Federal Reserve System. J.P. Morgan was ordered by the Jesuits to build the Titanic. This unsinkable ship would serve as the death ship for those who oppose the Jesuits' plan for a Federal Reserve System. Yes, and I might add that there is a video by National Geographic, which there's a quote a little bit later in this about it, but just wanted to add that they took the ship out and gave it a test, an 8-hour test, test run, and in the test run they termed it the ship unsinkable. So that's funny, they had to really, really ramp up the propaganda back there in 1910 or 1912 or whatever it was. I mean, when they had that, I think it was 1912, wasn't it, when they launched the test run. But anyway, yeah, back to the reading here. So where was I? Fourth paragraph, fifth paragraph, somewhere in here. So I'll just start that paragraph again. There were a number of very rich and powerful men who made it abundantly clear that they were not in favor of the Federal Reserve System. J.P. Morgan was ordered by the Jesuits to build the Titanic. This unsinkable ship would serve as a death ship for those who opposed the Jesuits' plan for a Federal Reserve System. These rich and powerful men would have been able to block the establishment of the Federal Reserve, and their power and fortunes had to be taken out of their hands. They had to be destroyed by a means so preposterous that no one would suspect that they were murdered, and no one would suspect the Jesuits. The Titanic was the vehicle of their destruction. In order to further shield the papacy and the Jesuits from suspicion, many Irish, French, and Italian Roman Catholics immigrating to the New World were aboard. They were people who were expendable. Protestants from Belfast who wanted to immigrate to the United States were also invited on board. All the wealthy and powerful men the Jesuits wanted to get rid of were invited to take the cruise. Three of the richest and most important of these were Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, the head of Macy's department stores, and John Jacob Astor, probably the wealthiest man in the world. Their total wealth at that time, using dollar values of their day, was more than $500 million. Today, that amount of money would be worth nearly $11 billion. These three men were coaxed and encouraged to board the floating palace. They had to be destroyed because the Jesuits knew they would use their wealth and influence to oppose a Federal Reserve Bank as well as the various wars that were being planned. Edward Smith was the captain of the Titanic. He had been traveling the North Atlantic waters for 26 years and was the world's most experienced master of the North Atlantic routes. He had worked for Jesuit J.P. Morgan for many years. Edward Smith was a Jesuit temporal coadjutor. This means that he was not a priest, but he was a Jesuit of the short robe. Jesuits are not necessarily priests. Those who are not priests serve the order through their profession. Anyone could be a Jesuit, and their identity would not be known. Well, a little comment here. The only way to truly know someone is to know their principles. So, and you can only know someone's principles by seeing their motivations behind what they do. So I had to comment that. But anyway, back to the reading here. Edward Smith served the Jesuit order in his profession as a sea captain. Many interesting points about the Titanic are discovered in a videotape made by National Geographic in 1986, which you can find on YouTube, by the way. Just search Secrets of the Titanic. You'll find it. Okay, so back to the reading. The videotape is entitled The Secrets of the Titanic. When the Titanic departed from southern England on April 10, 1912, Francis Brown, the Jesuit master of Edward Smith. Francis Brown, the Jesuit master of Edward Smith. That's right. So Francis Brown was controlling and dictating to Edward Smith. And I don't know, I haven't done much of the research there as to their history, but it would be interesting, if you really wanted to search more on that, to dig in and find out more about that, because it's pretty fascinating how this works. Pretty sickening, actually, sad. That men would dictate their orders and do such despicable things, but this is how it works, people. We don't really have a choice. It's just, this is how the enemy works. He works through the oaths and through the consciences of the people that subject themselves to these types of principles. So Francis Brown, the Jesuit master of Edward Smith, boarded the Titanic. This man was the most powerful Jesuit in all of Ireland and answered directly to the general of the Jesuit order in Rome. The videotape declares, quote, a vacationing priest, Father Francis Brown, caught these poignant snapshots of his fellow passengers, most of them on a voyage to eternity. The next day, Titanic made her last stop off the coast of Queenstown, Ireland. Here, tenders brought out the last passengers, mostly Irish immigrants headed for the new homes in America. And here, lucky Father Brown, quote unquote, Father Brown, disembarked. Quote, Father, unquote, Brown caught Captain Smith peering down from the Titanic's bridge, poised on the brink of destiny, unquote. The Secrets of the Titanic, National Geographic videotape, 1986. Quote, here is Jesuit treachery at its finest. The provincial Father Francis Brown boards Titanic, photographs the victims, most assuredly briefs the captain concerning his oath as a Jesuit, and the following morning bids him farewell, unquote. Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins. Brown went over with Edward Smith one last time exactly what he was supposed to do in the North Atlantic waters. The Jesuit general told Francis Brown the Jesuit general told Francis Brown what was to happen. Brown then tells Smith the rest is history. Edward Smith believed that the Jesuit general, quote, is the god of the Jesuit society, and nothing but his electric touch can galvanize their dead corpses into life and action. Until he speaks, they are like serpents coiled up in their wintry graves, lifeless and inactive. But the moment he gives the word of command, each member springs instantaneously to his feet, leaving unfinished whatsoever may have engaged him, ready to assail whomever he may require to be assailed, and to strike wheresoever he shall direct a blow to be stricken, unquote. R.W. Thompson, The Footprints of the Jesuits. Edward Smith was given an order to sink the Titanic, and that's exactly what he did. Quote, by the command of God, the Jesuit general, it's lawful to murder the innocent, to rob, to commit all lewdness, because he, the Pope, is Lord of life and death and of all things, and thus to fulfill his mandate is our duty, unquote. W.C. Brownlee, The Secret Instructions of the Jesuits. Quote, there is no record in history of an assassination whose organization has stood for 300 years unchanged and unaltered by all the assaults of men and time, which has exercised such immense influence over the destinies of mankind. The end justifies the means is his favorite maxim, and is his only end, as we have shown, is the order at its bidding. The Jesuit is ready to commit any crime whatsoever, unquote. G.B. Niccolini, The History of the Jesuits.
In 1910, a group of the richest men in the world took part in a secret meeting at Jekyll Island, Georgia, just across the Florida border. The occasion for this clandestine gathering was the conception of the Federal Reserve banking system as a direct remedy to the panic of 1907, the first worldwide financial crisis of the 20th century. Instead of enhancing the stability of American banking, as these men pretended it would, the Federal Reserve would instead cast the entire Earth into multiple world wars and an even more terrible financial crisis, the Great Depression of 1929. However, with the signing of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, the men involved in that secret meeting at Jekyll Island guaranteed the fortunes of their respective families and business partners for generations to come. As a direct result of this legislation, a majority of humanity is today fiscally enslaved by an international cult of banking elite. In 1994, American author, filmmaker, and Army veteran G. Edward Griffin published The Creature from Jekyll Island, which uncovered the secrecy and motives behind that infamous meeting at the Jekyll Island clubhouse. Although the book is wonderfully written and meticulously researched, it failed to consider the unique Native American history of Southeast Georgia and how ancient Indian magic may have fostered such a despicable deed. It would not be until American preacher and Christian mystic Timothy Bence gave a telephone interview around 2012 about a trip to Jekyll Island just before the 2007 financial collapse that a more insidious connection between the Federal Reserve and ritualistic human sacrifice was brought to light. Bence told of how an unusually tall tribe of Indians, known as the Timucua, native to the area, sacrificed their firstborn children in a nearly identical manner to the Canaanites from the Old Testament, going as far as to reveal that a cottage on the island, once owned by John D. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest men in the world, had been built on top of the very spot where a sacrificial altar once stood. Join us as we uncover the Rockefeller family, J.P. Morgan, the sinking of the Titanic, real-life giants, Indian mounds, golf, occult secret societies, and a few suspicious technological innovations as they relate to the hidden history of Florida and Georgia. This video is lengthy and information-dense, so make sure to kick back, spark up, and pour yourself a little liquid sunshine while you're at it. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect my own. Part 1. A History of Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island is an island on the Atlantic coast of southeast Georgia in Glynn County, located only 30 miles north of the Florida border. According to the New Georgia Encyclopedia, the 5,700-acre barrier island is fronted by Jekyll Creek and salt marsh on the western side, and defined by its beach and the Atlantic Ocean on the eastern side. The natural environment of Jekyll Island is a magnolia, live oak forest canopy with a forest floor dominated by palmetto and scrub oak. Mammals found on the island include white-tailed deer, raccoons, rabbits, and squirrels. The tidal creeks and streams of the salt marsh provide a variety of resources, including seasonal fish and shellfish. The indigenous people who inhabited the area when Europeans first arrived were the Timucua and Guale tribes. Keep these tribes in mind, as we will be discussing them in depth further on. French Huguenots led by Jean Ribault are the first Europeans to have attempted an official settlement on Jekyll around 1564, as they colonized what was then known as La Florida. But the Spanish may have landed on the island as early as 1510, giving it the name La Isla de Balenas, meaning Island of Whales, while the French called it Ile de la Somme. Now we come to the naming of Jekyll Island. In 1733, after founding the province of Georgia for England, General James Oglethorpe named Jekyll Island in honor of his friend, Sir Joseph Jekyll, a British barrister, judge, and high-ranking Whig politician who sat in the English and British House of Commons for 40 years, from 1697 to 1738. Bearing this name, it would seem Jekyll Island was destined for a future of finance, as Joseph was a wealthy financier himself. He was instrumental in convincing the House of Commons to fund the colony of Georgia. Never before had Britain directly supplied a colony with government funds. Joseph would also personally contribute $600 to the colony, which was quite a bit of money in those days. Interestingly, around 1740, Jekyll Island saw the creation of Georgia's first ever alcoholic brewery. In 1792, Christophe Dubignon, a Frenchman fleeing the French Revolution, purchased a significant parcel in Jekyll. The island was then confiscated by Great Britain after its then owner, John Martin, was accused of treason. Although it would fall into the hands of Americans, the War of 1812 saw British military raids against the island. When a ship known as the Wanderer docked at Jekyll Island in 1858, its human cargo became one of the last known shipments of blacks sold into American slavery. After the Civil War, Jekyll Island would quickly become a favored retreat for many of the world's wealthiest families. In 1886, the island was purchased by the Jekyll Island Club, a turn-of-the-century vacation resort patronized by America's leading families. By 1904, Munsey's magazine had deemed Jekyll Island, quote, the richest, the most exclusive, the most inaccessible club in the world, end quote. These men and women came to fish, swim, golf, hunt, shoot skeet, sail, and ride horses, and as we will see shortly, to conduct their secretive meetings in absolute privacy. It was common for these billionaires, in today's money, to construct or purchase a small home on the island, in addition to being a member of the island's exclusive club. Let us give a brief description for some of the cottages as to demonstrate the degree of wealth which was attracted to Jekyll Island at the turn of the century. Dubignon Cottage was built in 1884 by John Eugene Dubignon, the fourth-generation owner of the island itself. Hollyburn Cottage was built in 1890 by founding club member Charles Stewart Maurice, a successful American bridge designer. The cottage known as the Infirmary was built in 1890 for the youngest founding member of the Jekyll Island Club, Walter Furness, of the architectural firm Furness, Evans and Company. Indian Mound Cottage was originally constructed in 1892 for shoe magnate and philanthropist Gordon Mackay, but would later be purchased by William Rockefeller, Jr. in 1905. William's older brother, John Davison Rockefeller, the principal founder of Standard Oil, remodeled the house in 1910. The name of the cottage comes from the fact that it was erected in the footprint of an ancient Indian burial mound or shell midden. Make sure to keep that in mind. Moss Cottage was built for William Struthers, Jr. in 1896, but the identity of the original architect has not officially been determined. Interestingly, Struthers owned one of the largest marble firms in the country, and his family is said to have contributed to the construction of Philadelphia's Second Bank of the United States, among other notable buildings. The building known as the Sans Souci was one of America's very first condominiums, being erected on Jekyll in 1896 by Henry Hyde, the owner of the largest life insurance company in America at the time.
The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is an 1886 Gothic novella by Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson. It follows Gabriel John Utterson, a London-based legal practitioner who investigates a series of strange occurrences between his old friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll, and a murderous criminal named Edward Hyde. In popular culture, the term Jekyll and Hyde is used in reference to a person or thing that alternately displays two different sides to their character or nature. The phrase Jekyll and Hyde employs a literary reference to describe a stock market that appears to have a split personality, mixing good and bad character traits. Jekyll represents the good in a market. It is benign, predictable, and conducive to trading gains.
A small group of the club's founding members, including J.P. Morgan, were among the building's original residents. Mistletoe Cottage was designed by former architect Charles Alling Gifford around 1897 and would go on to be purchased by American Congressman Henry Kirk Porter. Goodyear Cottage was built by famed architects Carrere and Hastings in 1906 for the lumber baron Frank Henry Goodyear, whose family would go on to dominate the rubber tire industry and plaster their name on America's few remaining airships. As one can imagine, with all this wealth, the inhabitants of Jekyll Island found themselves at the forefront of cutting-edge technologies. The first ever transatlantic phone call was made from Jekyll Island. The families of Jekyll Island also had access to fully electric automobiles, known as redbugs, as early as World War I.
Do it. You can take a drive. It's going to take you on a drive.
In World War II, the island was confiscated by the government for matters of national security. However, the state of Georgia then purchased Jekyll Island through a condemnation order on October 7, 1947, for $675,000. Interestingly, on this very day, President Truman would make the very first televised broadcast from inside the White House. Jekyll Island has been operated as a state park ever since that day, but was only accessible by boat until 1954, when the first bridge was completed. Although the island is technically owned by the state of Georgia, it is actually run by a self-sustaining, self-governing body. Part 2. The Federal Reserve. Having now provided a brief history of the island and the wealth which was attracted to it, we may now discuss the most infamous event in Jekyll's history, the conception of the Federal Reserve. The following comes to us from George Edward Griffin, author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, first published in 1994.
Municipalities such as this. That's Mr. G. Edward Griffin. Yes. Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how to take that remark about age. You know, when Bill Jasper stands up and they announce him as the senior editor for the magazine, I know I'm in trouble. So, okay, now to the topic. Are you ready for this? Okay, so am I. So let's start with history. We'll go back to the 1st century BC, to a tiny kingdom called Phrygia. And it was in that kingdom that there lived a philosopher by the name of Epictetus. And it was Epictetus who said, "Appearances are of 4 kinds. Things either are as they appear to be, or they neither are nor appear to be, or they are but do not appear to be, or they are not and yet appear to be." Don't worry, no quiz on that. Well, that's what he said. When I read that statement for the first time, I thought to myself that surely if Epictetus were alive today, he would undoubtedly be a Harvard professor of money and banking. Because this is the kind of explanation we get, isn't it, when we try and figure out what's going on in the economy, or what's going on with the Federal Reserve System. See, what Epictetus did is what is so commonly done with the experts in this field, is he took a relatively simple concept, but by the time he was through explaining it to us, we didn't have the foggiest idea what he was talking about. All he said, basically, was that appearances can sometimes be deceiving. That's all. We all know that. But he had to break it down into 4 component parts, explained that in 2 ways they are what they appear to be, and in other 2 ways they sometimes are not the way they appear to be, and they broke it down and we didn't understand what he's talking about. Nevertheless, I thought that this statement by Epictetus was a brilliant clue for an outline or a theme for my presentation. Because you know, if there's anything in the world that is an appearance that is deceiving, it is the Federal Reserve System. And in particular, it is one of those appearances of the 4th kind, which, as I'm sure you all remember, are those which are not and yet appear to be. So that's going to be my theme tonight. I'm going to come back to it now and then if I remember to do it, and use it as kind of a punctuation point, because this is perhaps at the most fundamental level the most important thing we need to know about the Federal Reserve System, which is that it is an appearance of the 4th kind, something which is not and yet appears to be. When I did my research on this topic, I came to the conclusion, which may startle you folks here, that the Federal Reserve System does not need to be audited. It needs to be abolished. And the reason I say that is because I'm sure that if they audited the Federal Reserve System, they would find out that it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. There's no secret there. There's no shenanigan going on behind the scenes. It's all out in the open. If we'll just study the Federal Reserve System on the basis of what we know already, if we'll read their literature, if we'll dig into the history, we find out that it's one of the greatest scams of all history. Out on the surface, it doesn't need an audit. An audit, I'm sure, would merely delay the process for a couple of years, give the American people the false impression that something is being done about this problem, and at the end of 2 years they'd say, well, the books are clean. I came to the conclusion that the Federal Reserve needed to be abolished for 7 reasons, actually, and I'd like to read them for you now. I've stated them in rather concise terms. Hopefully they'll have some shock value so you can remember them. And here they are. First of all, it is incapable of accomplishing its stated objectives. 2, it is a cartel operating against the public interest. 3, it is the supreme instrument of usury. 4, it generates our most unfair tax. 5, it encourages war. 6, it destabilizes the economy. And 7, it is an instrument of totalitarianism. Now, I don't know what you think about those 7 points. I know that a lot of you are totally in agreement with it. I can tell by your reaction. I trust that there are some skeptics here tonight. I hope there are. Otherwise, I feel like the minister talking to the choir. Usually there are skeptics in my audience, and frankly, those are the ones I'm most interested in talking to. And for the skeptics, I'm sure that you're thinking, those sound like pretty far out statements. How could you ever demonstrate them to be true? But I think you would agree, regardless of your preliminary conclusion about those statements, that if any of them could be proven to be true, it would be good enough reason to abolish the Federal Reserve System. So let's take a look and see whether they can be supported. Time doesn't permit to go into all 7 of those here this evening, but I would like to splash around on at least the first 4 of them to show you that indeed there is ample evidence to support these conclusions. And I think the best place to begin with all of this is where the action was, and that is the creation of the Federal Reserve System. And that takes us directly to the title of my book, the creature from Jekyll Island. You can almost hear the music being played in the background as they do some kind of a spot commercial to sell this book. I have to admit I had a lot of fun with that title because I had this fantasy in my mind that someday it might be in a bookstore window and people would pass by and think, oh, it's a sequel to Jurassic Park. But anyway, that will never happen, I'm sure. The fact of the matter is, for those of you who know a little bit about this topic, the title has quite a bit of meaning in it. And we have a lot to learn by exploring what that meaning is. First of all, Jekyll Island is a real island. It's off the coast of Georgia. And it was on that island back in 1910 that the Federal Reserve System was conceived at a highly secret meeting that took place there. And what I'd like to do is talk about this meeting and show you that, in fact, the Federal Reserve was created there, and that there was a lot of secrecy surrounding it. And then we'll be confronted with the question, why the secrecy? When things are done in secret, there are often things to hide. And we'll explore what it was that they wanted to hide. And when we finally understand what that was, we'll be face to face with one of the most important facts about the Federal Reserve System that is not generally known. In 1910, Jekyll Island was privately owned by a small group of millionaires. In those days, they were millionaires. In today's dollars, they would be billionaires from New York. This is where their families went to spend the winter months. It was a resort island, a resort club. It was called the Jekyll Island Club. And there was a very elaborate clubhouse there, which was the center of their social activities. It's still there, by the way, if anybody wants to visit it. The island has been purchased by the state of Georgia, and this clubhouse has been renovated. It's a beautiful thing. And around this clubhouse, they had cottages, which were built by many of the families that belonged to the club. Cottages are not exactly the word I would have chosen to describe these structures. I remember on taking the tour through one of them, the guide said that there were 14 bathrooms in that cottage. So you have an idea of the kind of elegance that was there. In any event, the number of bathrooms has nothing to do with the story. I just get hung up on that because it's hard for me to imagine a cottage with that much running plumbing. But the important point was that this is where the Federal Reserve System was conceived, is in that clubhouse. So let's tell that story. It all began in November of 1910 when Senator Nelson Aldrich sent his private railroad car to the New Jersey Railroad Station, where there it was in readiness for the arrival of himself and 6 other men who were instructed to come under conditions of great secrecy. For example, they were told to come one at a time, not to be seen together, not to dine together on the night of their departure. If they had arrived at the same time, they were instructed to pretend as though they didn't even know each other. They were to avoid newspaper reporters, because these were well-known men, and had they been spotted by reporters, which often frequented the railroad station, especially had they been seen together, many questions would have been asked. One of the men carried a shotgun in a big black case, so that if he had been asked where he was going, he was prepared to say that he was going on a duck hunting trip. And the interesting thing about that little piece of the history is that this man, we find out later from his biographer, never fired a gun in his life. He even had to borrow that shotgun in order to participate in this deception. Even after they got on board the railroad car, this pattern continued. They were told to use first names only, not to use last names. And 2 of the men adopted code names completely. The reason for that is that they were afraid that the servants on board the train would recognize who they were if they used their last names. And they knew that if word leaked out in that fashion and eventually found its way into the press. The whole purpose of the meeting would have been completely destroyed. So absolute secrecy was essential. Well, the train traveled for 2 nights and a day on a 1,000-mile journey to the south. And when they awoke on the second morning, the car was on the siding, the railroad siding at Brunswick, Georgia. And from there they took the ferry boat across the inland strait to Jekyll Island and to the clubhouse. And for the next 9 days, these men sat around a table and hammered out all the important details of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. And incidentally, if you visit that clubhouse today, you can walk down to the end of the one corridor there, and on a door is a brass plaque. And it says, "In this room, the Federal Reserve System was created." When they were done, they got back on board the train, back to New York, and disappeared. And for quite a few years after that, these men denied that any such meeting ever took place. It wasn't until after the Federal Reserve was firmly established that only then did they begin to talk openly about it. They wrote books on it. One of them wrote a magazine article, and they gave interviews to newspaper reporters. And so now, many years later, it's possible for us to go to the public record and find in print detailed descriptions of what happened at that meeting. Well, who were these men? The first one I've already mentioned, the one with the railroad car, Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was the Republican whip in the Senate. He was also chairman of the National Monetary Commission, which was that special committee of Congress which was created for the purpose of proposing legislation which was to reform banking. That was the idea. Banking needed reform. And the American people were greatly concerned in those days over things that were going on in the banking industry. People were losing their money in the banks because they weren't keeping their promises to hold their deposits in reserve. There were runs on the bank, and the banks couldn't pay the people back. But most of all, they were concerned over the concentration of financial power that was in the hands of a small group of very powerful and large banks in New York on Wall Street. This is what they called the money trust. That was the name. And it was a very popular expression in the newspapers. And quite a few politicians were elected to office on their campaign promise to break the grip of the money trust. President Wilson was one of those politicians, by the way. So, that was the purpose of the National Monetary Commission, which was to propose legislation, which eventually became the Federal Reserve Act, to break the grip of the money trust over the financial markets of America. Aldrich was a business associate of J.P. Morgan. He was the father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller, Jr., which means, of course, that eventually he became the grandfather of Nelson Rockefeller, our former vice president. You remember his full name was Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, so he derived his middle name from his famous grandfather. The second person at the meeting was Abraham Piatt Andrew, who was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. He later became a congressman, but he was very prominent in banking circles. Frank Vanderlip was there. He was the president of the National City Bank of New York, which was the largest and the most powerful of all the banks in the country, representing the financial interests of William Rockefeller and the international investment firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Henry Davison was there. He was the senior partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. Charles Norton was present. He was the president of the First National Bank of New York, which was another one of the giants. Also, there was Benjamin Strong, who was the head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And incidentally, 3 years later, when the Federal Reserve System was finally created, he became the first head of the system. And finally, there was Paul Warburg, who was probably the most important of all the men there because of his knowledge of banking as it was practiced in Europe. Paul Warburg was born in Germany. He eventually became a naturalized American citizen. He was a partner in Kuhn, Loeb and Company. He was a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France. And through all the years of his banking in America, he remained in very close contact with his brother, Max Warburg, who was the head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. Paul Warburg was one of the wealthiest men in the world. And those of you who are Little Orphan Annie fans, you'll remember Daddy Warbucks. Well, Paul Warburg was the real Daddy Warbucks, after whom that character was named. And everyone at the time knew it. I have his photograph in the book. If you'd like to compare his picture to the drawing rendition of Daddy Warbucks, you'll see the similarity between Warbucks and Warburg. And also, while we're on the subject of cartoon characters, anyone who's played Monopoly will remember the drawing of the capitalist with the handlebar mustache and the cigar. That's J.P. Morgan. Those are the 7 men who were on Jekyll Island, and as incredible as it may seem, they represented approximately 1/4 of the wealth of the entire world. And these are the men that sat around a table on Jekyll Island and created the Federal Reserve System. What's going on here? Should arouse our curiosity a little bit. Didn't just happen. Well, speaking of it just happening, for the skeptics, you're probably wondering, did it really happen that way? Perhaps Griffin is exaggerating this to make a point. Well, yes, it really happened that way, and to illustrate that, we could go to a lot of documentation, but to simplify this, I'd like to just read for you a short excerpt taken from one article written by Frank Vanderlip, who was one of the attendees at that meeting. And this was written in the Saturday Evening Post, and it appeared on February 9, 1935. And this is what Vanderlip said. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. We were told to leave our last names behind us. We were told further that we should avoid dining together on the night of our departure. We were instructed to come one at a time, and as unobtrusively as possible, to the railroad terminal on the New Jersey littoral of the Hudson, where Senator Aldrich's private car would be in readiness, attached to the rear end of a train to the south. Once aboard the private car, we began to observe the taboo that had been fixed on last names. We addressed one another as Ben, Paul, Nelson, and Abe. Davison and I adopted even deeper disguises, abandoning our first name. On the theory that we were always right, he became Wilbur and I became Orville, after those 2 aviation pioneers, the Wright brothers. The servants and train crew may have known the identities of 1 or 2 of us, but they did not know all, and it was the names of all printed together that would have made our mysterious journey significant in Washington, in Wall Street, even in London. Discovery, we knew, simply must not happen. Well, why? What's the big deal here? What's wrong with a group of bankers getting together in private and talking about banking or banking legislation? And the answer to that question is provided by Vanderlip himself in the same article. He said, if it were to be exposed publicly that our particular group had got together and written a banking bill, that bill would have no chance whatever of passage by Congress. Why not? Because the purpose of the bill was to break the grip of the money trust. And ladies and gentlemen, it was written by the money trust. It's as simple as that. Had that fact been known from the very beginning, the public would never have accepted it as a means of breaking the grip over the money trust. And we would never have had a Federal Reserve System, because the scam would have been exposed from the beginning. This was like having the fox build the hen house and install the security system. So there is a primary reason for the secrecy. And it's a fact that most Americans have not even considered, that there might have been some kind of deception, massive deception, at the very inception of the Federal Reserve System, and for a very good reason. But there's more to it than that, a lot more than that. Consider the composition of this group and the financial powers they represented. Is there anything strange about that mixture? Here we had the Rockefellers, we had the Morgans, Kuhn, Loeb and Company, the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, all in one room for 9 days plus 2 days on the train, coming to an agreement. What's going on here? Anything strange about that mixture? Well, ladies and gentlemen, these were competitors. These were the giants in the field which prior to this period had been beating their heads against each other for dominance in the marketplace, for dominance in the financial markets of the world, not only New York, but Paris and London, everywhere. Competitors. This is extremely significant because it happened at precisely that point of American history when business was undergoing a major ideological transition. Prior to this period, America had grown and prospered and surpassed all the countries of Europe as an industrial and economic power because it adhered to the principle of free enterprise competition. And it was in this period that a rapid transition was taking place to the concept of monopoly and cartel. Going back, in fact, to the old world concept, which had held Europe back for all these years. Monopolies and cartels were becoming the order of the day in America. It was John D. Rockefeller I who said it. He said, "Competition is a sin." He believed it. All of his biographers quote him on that one, by the way. And he and others of these industrialists of the period were devoting all of their time to the elimination of competition. They did not believe in free enterprise competition at all. They knew that the road to riches and power was through the elimination of their competition.
During our visit to Jekyll Island, one of our very first stops would be the Federal Reserve Room, but it happened to be locked. Fortunately, we befriended a concierge by the name of Chris, who ended up treating us wonderfully. He permitted us access to the Federal Reserve Room, and was even nice enough to give us a private tour. Chris was more than receptive to some of our perspectives, and even allowed me to film our encounter.
Wow.
It's a setup for a meeting, but this is the room. Kind of small, but kind of big. We've got these.
Howdy, Chris.
Hey there. We are in the Federal Reserve Room at the Jekyll Island Club Resort, which formerly the Jekyll Island Club. We're standing on a building that was finished in 1886, and we are standing currently in the Federal Reserve Room, where meetings were happening regarding finishing and penning the Federal Reserve and pushing through Congress, which I heard was on Christmas Eve when all their friends were there, but all their enemies were home with their families. And it finally got pushed through in 2010, maybe. And then these gentlemen up here are at least the faces of helping push it through, and Senator Nelson Aldridge of Rhode Island, the majority leader of the Senate and the best informed man on financial matters in Congress. And you've got 5 other gentlemen From the elite of the banking and financial world, 1910. Couple of pictures of Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan on the Centennial, 2010. Probably a bit of a meeting, but also just ceremonial photo op day. I believe they're just here for one day. And this is the First Name Club letter at the train in New York. And then on Jekyll, some information, basically how to travel without letting the press or anyone know who knew these people, start to write stories. Why are these people all together? They had to travel on separate train cars and use their first name. Yeah.
And why isn't Rockefeller on the list right here? Was he not one of the 6?
I can only assume he didn't want to be.
Because I know he was involved.
Yeah, I'm guessing those 6 were talked into becoming the face of this, but behind it, I've heard a lot of people in this room with a lot of conversations that I've had, say that there's other people, including Rockefeller, behind all of it, really behind the idea, but didn't really want to be on paper involved.
I don't think Morgan's up there either.
JP Morgan's not up there.
Right.
No.
So
these gentlemen are also already in politics, and they're in the public eye.
Right. And how about, I just had another question. Is this supposed to symbolize fish?
I only know what my design background tells me. I see a trident, and I see 2 fish facing each other. Seashells, maybe water.
And how much is this symbol used around the club, around the island?
You know what? I think I've only seen it here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looks like a shrine to Poseidon or something.
Yes.
Neptune. That's actually where we get the word finance. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
The twin, or double fish, is the chief emblem of Pisces, the 12th and last sign of the zodiac. Pisces gets its name from Poseidon, which is the Greek word for the Roman god and planet, Neptune. Neptune rules over Pisces, and is unmistakably symbolized by the trident. Pisces is the sign of the zodiac which rules over finance and banking. Thus we get the word fiscal, meaning financial, but also fish. We get the word finance from the same root, fin, as in the fin of a fish, or to finish, and thus Pisces is the final sign or finale of the zodiac. Pisces, being a water sign, is responsible for the endless associations between water and money, as in the banks of a river, cash flow, currency, liquidity, debt being depth, and so on. Pisces and Poseidon also rule over psychology, and thus the medical symbol for that field is the trident. Interestingly, Jekyll Island resident and co-conspirator to the Federal Reserve, John D. Rockefeller, is the direct reason why over 99% of pharmaceuticals are made from petrochemicals.
I just saw a trident and a couple fish and some seashells, but that is maybe an homage to Poseidon, which I just learned is all financial language.
Although G. Edward Griffin gave the most complete and revelatory description yet of the secret meetings held at Jekyll Island in his book, there were a few major elements which he did not cover. The largest of these matters is the sinking of the Titanic. Many have argued that the Titanic was sunk on purpose to eliminate opposition to the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. Some of the wealthiest men in the world were aboard the Titanic for her maiden voyage. several of whom, including John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus, were allegedly opposed to the creation of a U.S. central bank. All three men died during the sinking. According to these theories, J.P. Morgan, the 74-year-old financier who set up the eponymous banking firm, arranged to have the men board the ship and then sunk it to eliminate them. Morgan, nicknamed the Napoleon of Wall Street, had helped create General Electric, U.S. Steel, and International Harvester, and was credited with almost single-handedly saving the U.S. banking system during the Panic of 1907. As we have already discussed, Morgan had a hand in the creation of the Federal Reserve, but also owned the International Mercantile Marine, which owned the White Star Line, and thus the Titanic. Morgan, who had attended the Titanic's launch in 1911, had booked a personal suite aboard the ship, with his own private promenade, deck, and a bath equipped with specially designed cigar holders. He was reportedly booked on the ship's maiden voyage, but instead canceled the trip and remained at the French resort of Les-Bains to enjoy his morning massages and sulfur baths. His alleged last-minute cancellation has fueled speculation that he knew of the ship's fate. The fact that Morgan and his wife were both infatuated with astrology and the occult fueled even further speculation. There are also many who believe that the ship that sank was in fact Titanic's sister ship, Olympic, disguised as Titanic, as an insurance scam by its owners. The International Mercantile Marine Group, controlled by American financier J.P. Morgan, that had acquired the White Star Line in 1902. Griffin would also neglect to consider Jekyll Island's Native American history and all spiritual reasons for why the island was selected as a meeting place for such an evil endeavor.